The M60 general-purpose machine gun is one of the most iconic weapons of the Vietnam War. You've seen the photos of soldiers posing with criss-crossed ammo belts and the M60 slung like it came straight out of an action movie. But behind them was a much darker story, because while the M60 earned a mix of admiration and infamy, it also became a curse for many of the soldiers unfortunate enough to carry it into battle, and not all of them made it back. Back in World War II, American troops had gotten a first-hand look at just how advanced German weapons were. They were the first to introduce the idea of a general-purpose machine gun, where one weapon could handle a wide range of roles without needing an entirely new design for every situation. So after the war, American weapons designers looked at two weapons that stood out the most: the MG42 and the FG42. The MG42 we all heard about, with its terrifyingly high rate of fire and quick-change barrel system. The FG42, meanwhile, was compact, ergonomic, and designed for airborne troops. What the Americans wanted was something in between, a weapon with the portability and handling of the FG, but with the sustained firepower of the MG. So that's what they set out to build. They took the MG42's feeding system, merged it with the overall structure of the FG42, added a few American design choices, and chambered it in the new standard 7.62mm NATO round. The M60 was born. It was supposed to be a modern, general-purpose machine gun to replace aging, crew-served weapons like the Browning M1919. And with another war just around the corner, it wouldn't be long before the M60 got a real-world trial. But that trial wouldn't go as smoothly as anyone hoped. The M60 fired from an open bolt, had folding bipods fixed directly to the barrel, and could also be mounted on a tripod or vehicles, helicopters or boats. Its rate of fire was around 600 rounds per minute, about half that of the MG42. However, a slower rate meant it was more controllable, more accurate, and used less ammo. Weight-wise, the M60 came in at around 24 pounds without ammunition, and while that technically made it one of the lightest machine guns of its class at the time, it sure didn't feel that way on jungle patrol. The gunner himself usually carried around 300 rounds on his body, with at least 100-round belt already loaded in the weapon. His assistant and ammo bearer would carry another 600 rounds at a minimum, but in reality, they would split about 1,800 rounds between them. Running out of ammo wasn't desirable, as the M60 was the squad's primary source of firepower. The 7.62 NATO round was much more effective in dense foliage, where the smaller 5.56 rounds fired by M16 simply struggled and deflected. But as you're about to see, carrying the M60 into battle was something no one would be excited to do. Being the M60 gunner in Vietnam was seen as a cursed role for good reason. Technically, the M60 was supposed to be operated by a three-man team we mentioned. The concept was borrowed from German World War II doctrine again, but in Vietnam, it couldn't be used effectively like that, and out in the jungle, the M60 usually became a one-man weapon. The gunner did most of the heavy lifting himself, while the rest of the squad helped carry extra belts of ammunition. And carrying that ammo was a task in itself. At first, troops would sling belts across their chests, Pancho Villa style. It looked cool in photos, but it wasn't exactly practical because those exposed belts were getting bent and catching on twigs and dirt, which could cause feeding failures, usually at the worst possible moment. So more experienced units would take old Claymore mine bags or even old radio packs and turn them into makeshift ammo carriers. They'd rig up a chute leading to the gun, sometimes feeding over 1,000 rounds in a continuous belt, ready to fire. It wasn't standard issue, but it worked, and when your life depended on that gun keeping firing, you didn't wait around for official solutions. Vietnam rarely followed doctrine. Most firefights were sudden, up close, and chaotic. Gunners had to fire from the bipod or straight from the hip. A strong operator could even fire while moving, keeping the pressure on the enemy. It laid down suppressive fire to break ambushes, pinned down enemy positions, and gave American troops a chance to move or escape. That kind of firepower came at a cost, though. The second that gun started firing, every enemy in the area knew where it was and who they needed to take out first. Just like radio men and officers, M60 gunners became priority targets in any ambush. Snipers would pick them off as soon as possible. Once the M60 opened up, the enemy focused all their effort on silencing it, because that one weapon could turn the tide of a small unit battle, and that's why carrying it brought you more additional risks that you wouldn't want in an already terrible war. US training manuals at the time didn't sugarcoat it either. They warned gunners that, in a firefight, their life expectancy is just 7 seconds after they pulled the trigger. It taught them to change positions constantly, stay behind cover, and rely on support of their squad to keep them alive. And while the M60 earned its fame in photos, movies, and war stories, it wasn't perfect. It had its flaws, and sometimes those flaws got the very men carrying it killed. Just like the M16, which was still a relatively new weapon at the time, the early M60s in Vietnam had serious issues with reliability. The M60 was highly vulnerable to dirt and fouling, and in a place where everything was soaked in mud, sweat, and humidity, that wasn't a minor problem. If it wasn't meticulously cleaned and maintained, it could jam, and that usually happened at the worst possible moment, right when you needed it the most. It was also considered awkward to handle in the field, especially when it came to changing the barrel. Now, in theory, it had a quick change barrel system, but in practice that system came with some real headaches. The front sight and the folding bipod were both attached directly to the barrel itself. So every time you swapped it out, it came off together with the sights and bipod. That made keeping the gun zeroed almost impossible. And even worse, there was no handle or latch so you could safely grab the hot barrel. Gunners had to use an asbestos glove or wrap the barrel in cloth to pull it off, which, under pressure, complicated the process more than it had to be. Horrible burns were sustained quite a few times this way, putting soldiers out of action. There was also a particularly nasty early design flaw involving the barrel latch system. The lever that locked the barrel in place could snag on brush and release the barrel, disassembling the gun, or perhaps even worse, the barrel would stay attached, but it wasn't actually locked. The gunner might not notice until he tried to fire, which again is not an ideal situation when someone is shooting at you. The M60 was often assigned to the newest or lowest ranking guy in the squad. Not many soldiers volunteered to carry extra weight and take on even more risk than necessary, so the job usually went to the greenest man on the team. And that had consequences, as the M60 wasn't very forgiving in untrained hands. This partly explains why the gun had such a mixed performance record in the early years of the war. Those who knew how to keep it working relied their life on it, while others said it was just trash. Another core issue was the lack of a gas regulator, so there was no way to adjust the timing of the gas system as the weapon fouled. Carbon buildup was a constant problem. The gas piston could slow down, leading to all kinds of malfunctions. The most interesting was probably the runaway, meaning the bolt didn't fully lock back, and the gun just kept firing on its own. The only way to stop it was to break the belt, twist it, or yank it sideways to cut off the feed, or control the gun until the ammo was exhausted. Spent casings sometimes failed to extract or got stuck in the ejection port, leading to torn cartridges or even double feeds. Shoving the cleaning rod through the barrel to clear the jam was also not good for your health in the middle of a firefight. The pistol grip and trigger housing were also known to crack under heavy use. Troops got creative in the field, for example attaching empty C-ration cans to guide the ammo belt better into the gun, or using wire from coat hangers to build makeshift carrying handles. Even the safety mechanism had its problems. The M60 used a push-lever safety that worked the opposite way of the M16's. In the middle of combat, that confused soldiers switching between weapons, and the safety itself wasn't particularly easy to use under stress. Many gunners just left it off entirely if they expected contact. All of this meant one thing: the M60 could be deadly effective, but only if the person carrying it knew its quirks, maintained it constantly, and had a squad willing to help keep it running. Otherwise, the pig would let you down, and in Vietnam, that usually meant someone wasn't coming home. One of the probably most legendary moments in the M60's combat history came when Marine Lance Corporal Richard Pittman earned the Medal of Honor, using the pig to single-handedly turn the tide of an ambush. When his platoon was pinned down by a much larger North Vietnamese force, Pittman grabbed an M60 from a fallen comrade and ran straight into the fight. Firing from the hip under heavy fire, he stormed forward and took out multiple enemy machine gun positions at point-blank range. Then he lay down and cut down wave after wave of charging NVA troops. When he finally ran out of M60 ammo, he picked up an enemy submachine gun and kept fighting. His actions saved the lives of many fellow Marines that day and earned him the nation's highest military honor. Stories like that helped solidify the M60's reputation, but back in the rear, the military knew the gun had serious flaws, and they were working on ways to fix them. Over time, the US military rolled out a series of upgrades, like the M60E3 and later E4, which incorporated many lessons from Vietnam. But during the mid-1960s, the average grunt in Vietnam didn't have the luxury of upgraded models. He had to work with what he got, and for many that meant dealing with a temperamental machine gun in the worst environment imaginable. In fact, the US Marine Corps was so skeptical of the M60's early performance that they initially resisted switching from the Browning automatic rifle. Eventually, though, most units were forced to adopt the M60, and over time, they learned how to handle its quirks. Along with the Huey helicopter, the M16 rifle, and the AK-47, the M60 became one of the defining weapons of the Vietnam War. The image of an infantryman with belts of ammo slung across his shoulders and an M60 in his hands became one of the enduring symbols of the war itself. You can now watch this video if you want, or God forbid, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.